In this video, I'll show you how to set up and manage live streams. And in this video, I'll show you how to set up and manage live streams. And in this video, I'll show you how to set up and manage live streams. And in this video, I'll show you how to set up and manage live streams. And in this video, I'll show you how to set up and manage live streams. And in this video, I'll show you how to set up and manage live streams. And in this video, I'll show you how to set up and manage live streams. And in this video, I'll show you how to set up and manage live streams. And
pretty much just because if you want to follow along with me as I do it, well, you're going to have a computer that meets these requirements. So real quick, there's three main things you got to make sure that you have. First of all, the computer has to have a processor that's at least 1.4 gigahertz. To have a processor that's at least 1.4 half a gig, or at least half a gig memory, at least half megabyte, and you have to have at least half megabyte of, and you have available half megabyte, and you have available half megabyte, yeah, you have, and you have available half megabyte mouse, and maybe a DVD drive if you're going to install off DVD. Okay, so you have to have some of those basics. But as far as the actual, resource requirements, that's it. 1.4 gigahertz processor, half a gig of RAM, and 32 gig of hard drive space. And if you think about it, you have to go back quite a few years to find a computer that doesn't meet those minimum requirements. And that's one of the cool things about Windows Server 2012. So now that you know that, let's go ahead and see how it's done. So to go ahead and get things started, what I have here, what we're looking at, is a virtual machine that I set up. Okay, now if you want to follow along, you can use any form of virtualization technology, or you can use an actual computer. Either way, as long as you meet the minimum hardware requirements. I happen to be using Hyper-V, and I have a virtual machine that I've set up here. I want you to ignore the fact that I've named this virtual machine NY-DC1. That's fine. That doesn't have to be. Although, because that is the name that I am eventually going to give to this computer that we're going to install, it's a good idea to name the virtual machine the same thing so that you can be consistent. But anyway, I just want to let you know this is a virtual machine, and one other thing I will tell you about this virtual machine is I have the Windows Server 2012 DVD in the drive. Or to be more specific, because it is virtualization, I have the image of the DVD. I have the ISO mounted to this particular virtual machine. So to get things started, I'm just going to click the little green button here, which it powers on the virtual machine. So I'll go ahead and click that now. You'll see that it's starting the machine. It's going to boot. But anyway, you'll see here that this is what the screen looks like when it is loading Windows Server 2012. So take just a moment here, and there we get the initial Windows setup window. Okay, and all you have to do is pick what language and keyboard input method you're going to be using based upon what part of the world you're in. Since I'm here in the United States, speak English, I'm going to leave everything at the defaults. Go ahead and click Next and Install Now. Now I will tell you, if you've ever installed a Windows Server operating system, this shouldn't be new to you. Okay, there's really nothing in here that is that much newer than anything else that we've ever had before. Now here is where we need to go ahead and enter in a product key. Give me just a moment here and I'll enter in my product key. If you're following along, if you have an actual licensed copy, you will also be prompted for this. Whereas I want to mention, if you happen to be using an evaluation copy, okay, if you went out to Microsoft and you got the eval copy of Windows Server 2012, you will not be prompted with this window. Okay, so if you're following along and you didn't get this, that's why. All right, let me get my key in here. Once the key has been entered, you go ahead and click Next. And this is something else that's a little bit interesting about how things work with Windows Server 2012, and that is because the key that I entered happened to be a key specific for Windows Server 2012 Standard Edition, the only options I get here are Windows Server 2012 Standard, either with a GUI or the server core installation. Now, if I would have entered my key for Data Center Edition, then I would have seen that as a choice. Or again, if you're using the evaluation version, then you would see both show up here. You would see both standard and data center. And when it comes to editions, I will tell you, those are the only two editions that you will find through the retail outlet. Okay, Microsoft simplified this right down to two versions through the retail outlet, either standard or data center. And another thing that's different than what we've seen in the past is that standard edition is a fully functional edition. Okay, we're used to in the past where we had standard and then we had to go to enterprise to get full functionality. Well, now standard is full functionality, and the only real difference between standard edition and data center edition has to do with the number of virtual machines that you are licensed to use. And the short version is that standard has a limit and data center does not. Now, I will mention that there is one other edition that can come through a non-OEM outlet, okay, which, by the way, that's how all the other editions, and there's a number of them out there. I'm not going to go through them with you here. And you have to get them through the OEM outlet. In other words, they have to be pre-installed, pre-tested, pre-purchased, etc. There is one other version that does not fall into that, and that is if you were to buy Windows Server 2012 Hyper-V. Okay, that's the one other edition that you could get, is just the straight Hyper-V edition. All right, now getting back here to the edition that we're going to work with, which is Windows Server 2012 Standard Edition, I have two choices here. I have the server core installation or the server with a GUI installation. And I will point out to you that the default, okay, where it's highlighting by default, is the server core installation. And the reason why is because the idea with Windows Server 2012 is that you will never actually be at the machine. Okay, you should be remotely managing the server 90+% of the time. And for both resource and security reasons, you want to go ahead and have server core so that you can do the remote functionality with pretty much everything, because you're going to have the GUI on your Windows 8 client, or I suppose it could be another remote Windows Server 2012 computer. But this particular box will be secure and not tying up extra resources. All that said, we here, for the sake of this course, we're going to go ahead and install with the GUI. Okay, we want to have the full graphical user interface so that we can see how to manage everything from right here on the server. And the reason is not to go against what you would do in production. So I'm not trying to oppose what we should be doing. It's that we are in a learning environment here. We're not in a production environment. Now, the other thing I will tell you, and I'll tell you what, I'm going to go ahead and click Next, because I want to tell you, while we're waiting on this to flip to the next screen here, is that the ability to switch back and forth between the GUI and the core installation, or I should really say server core installation, is now available. And I'm going to show you that later on once we have the operating system installed. Let me go ahead and accept the license terms. And of course, make sure you read the whole end user license agreement, right? And I'm just joking that I'm scrolling down through all this. It's not a joke that you should read it. You should read it at some point, but we're not going to read it here. I'll go ahead and click Next, that we agree to it. And then we have a choice between upgrading, which of course we can't do because this is just a blank machine that has nothing on it, or go ahead and select Custom to go ahead and install a new copy of Windows Server 2012. Now you'll see that I have set up a 200 gigabyte hard drive. Okay, that's the virtual hard drive that I've set up as part of this virtual machine. And we want to go ahead and install on that 200 gig drive. I could just go ahead and click Next, or I could click Drive Options if I wanted to go ahead and create separate partitions. So let's say if I wanted to divide this into two separate 100 gig partitions, I could go ahead and click on New, and I could create a 100 gig partition or create both of them at this point, whatever we wanted to do. I'm going to go ahead and leave it as a single 200 gig hard drive. So I can just click Next. And then you'll see the installation process begins. Again, this looks very similar to previous versions of Windows Server. It's going to go through the various steps here where it's going to copy Windows files. As you can see, it's already complete. It's going to get those files ready for installation. It will install certain features and updates and then finish up. And more specifically, as part of this process, it's going to reboot a couple of times. So depending on the machine that you're using, whether it's a physical machine or whether it's a virtual machine, and depending on the actual hardware that you have in place, this can take anywhere from, I will tell you that I've seen it as short as 3 minutes, and I don't know what the long side is. Okay, I suppose it could take 20 or 30 minutes if you have a really slow computer. All right, so we're going to go ahead and let this process finish, and I will tell you that if my process finishes faster than yours, which it probably will, because through the magic of video recording, I can speed this up, you can go ahead and pause the lesson and then go ahead and resume when you've caught up to where we're at. So let's go ahead and let this finish, and we'll continue when we get to the next screen where it's prompting us to do something. Okay, so it has gone through its various processes and it rebooted a couple of times. What we're left with now is it's telling us that we need to go ahead and set up a password for the built-in administrator account on this computer. And as goofy as this might sound, this is one very slight, simple thing that has been changed. In Windows Server 2008, the process was the same. You would end up with having to put in a password for the administrator account here. But the verbiage changed to where it used to say that you had to change the password. And people would think, why do I have to change it when I haven't set it yet? So in this case, they've changed the verbiage so it's a little bit less confusing. So I'm going to go ahead and type in my own super secret password that I'm going to use when logging in as the administrator on this machine. So you go ahead and if you're following along, put in whatever super secret password you want to use. You'll see here that I had to enter it twice, and then I'll go ahead and click Finish. Now, some people think that this next thing is a little bit awkward, and I suppose maybe it is, but I think it's probably good from a security standpoint, and that is I just entered the administrator password. Matter of fact, I just entered it twice, and what does it do? It now says press Control-Alt-Delete to sign in, as opposed to just going ahead and logging in as administrator. So I'm going to go ahead and press Control-Alt-Delete and go ahead and enter in that super secret password that I just entered. And of course I typed it wrong. Go ahead and type it again here. There we go. And now it's going to log in for the first time. And what it's going to do, again, very similar to what we've seen in the past, but although we're going to say similar, a little bit different at the same time, and that is it's going to take us into the server manager by default. Okay, now when we installed Windows Server 2008, the first thing it did was it took us into the initial configuration utility. Okay, so there was an actual initial configuration that we would go through. Okay, it was actually called the ICT, the initial configuration tool. Well, here it just takes us right into Server Manager. And the reason why is because once in Server Manager, and this is something that we're gonna learn a lot about. I'm not going to go through all the various aspects of Server Manager here in this lesson because we're going to see how to use Server Manager as we go through all the lessons because we're going to spend a lot of time here. This is where you manage your servers. Go figure, they called it Server Manager. We manage servers. Crazy. No, what we want to do first is configure this local server. Okay, we want to set up this server, whereas the Server Manager is actually designed for not just working with the local server, but with remote servers as well. Okay, so that's something, again, we're going to have to get used to here with Windows Server 2012, is whether we're local or remote, it's the same utility. Now, I will tell you that if I click this link that says configure this local server, it's the same thing as if I click local server over here in the left pane. Okay, so it's the same thing. And as a matter of fact, what I'm going to do is I'm going to click configure this local server so that you can see what happens. You'll see this bar is going to go down when I click over here. So I'll click, and boom, just like we expected to see, it jumped down here to the local server. Now it's taking just a moment here while it loads up the information from the local server. And then what we see here is actually very similar to what we saw, especially in this top section here, in the properties section. This is very similar, and I can scroll this over. We can look at some of the stuff that's over here, to what we saw in the initial configuration tool previously. But with the old version, with the ICT, what would happen is you would go through and eventually you would check a box saying, don't show this to me anymore. And then it never failed. People would always ask me, how do I get that back? Now that I checked the box saying, don't show me, I actually kind of like that tool and I want it back. Well, now they've just merged it into one tool. It's in the Server Manager and you can get to it anytime you want. So let's just kind of go down through the different properties and see what we have to set up. The first thing is the computer name itself. You'll see here it assigns a random computer name. So I'm going to go ahead and click on that. And it takes me into the system properties where I can go ahead and change that computer name. And of course, I'm going to change it to NY-DC-1. Right? That was the name that we gave to the virtual machine because I know that that's the name that I want this computer to be. Now, just because I name it New York DC1 doesn't make it a domain controller. Okay, we'll see how to make it a domain controller in another lesson. Okay, but I know that this is going to become our domain controller, and that's why I'm naming it that. Now, we're not going to make it a member of a domain, although I could do that at this point if that was something I needed to do. But this particular server is going to become the domain. Okay, so I can't join a domain. So I'm going to leave it as a work group. I'll click OK. And then it tells me I have to restart for this to happen. So I'll click OK, close, and go ahead and restart now. So it'll take just a moment while this system reboots. But when it's done rebooting, what's going to happen is it'll prompt me to log in. I'll log in. The Server Manager will open by default. And I will tell you, again, similar to what we've seen in the past, you could check a box saying don't open the Server Manager by default. But again, you want to do everything from the Server Manager. So unlike previous operating systems where maybe we did not want utilities to open automatically, in this case, it's kind of nice that the Server Manager opens up automatically. So we're already back at the login screen, so I'll press Control-Alt-Delete. And I will enter in my password for the administrator account. It's going to get me to the desktop, and then the Server Manager will open by default. Once the Server Manager opens, I'm going to go ahead and jump back over to the local server, and we should see that the computer name has changed. So it's going to take just a moment while it finishes loading. You can see this little bar going across the top. Actually, there it is. Okay, you watch this bar go across the top. Once it stops, we can go ahead and configure this local server. I don't want you to worry about the fact that these flashed red for a moment. Okay, you'll notice one of them already has gone back to green, and no, I didn't click on anything. That happened automatically. The local server still has the services showing up as being red. That means that certain services have a problem. Okay, red means you have a problem, and that's one of the really nice things about this Server Manager. What I will tell you is I'm not going to worry about these services because these are just delayed services because we just rebooted the computer. It's not uncommon to see that happen. As a matter of fact, if I click refresh right up here, sometimes that is all that we need. In other words, I might just refresh the screen and boom, the services have already started. In this case, they're still going. So let's not worry about that. Let's go back to our local server. Now, I will tell you that while we wait for this to jump over to the local server, if this was a production machine and if this was not right after rebooting, that might be an issue that those services aren't started yet. Now, I will also tell you, you'll notice that there's a bit of a delay here. We're just looking at a white screen. Things are moving very slowly. And some of that could have to do with the level of resources that have been allocated to the virtual machine. And in the name of trying to get a number of virtual machines all together here so that I can demo a lot of this for you, I've put limited resources on these machines. But also, right after a reboot, you have certain services that are trying to start up and things like that. So it's not uncommon for this to be a little bit slow, especially when you're first configuring the server. So we're going to give this just a moment, and then we'll go ahead and continue. And so as you can see, everything has come up here. The computer name is now NYDC1, just like we changed it. We're still part of a work group. The Windows firewall is on. And again, typically you want the firewall to be on. But because of what we're going to do here in this learning environment, I'm going to make a recommendation that I typically would not recommend. Okay, I want you to go ahead and click on the firewall if you're following along, because I want you to turn it off. There are too many times that I've seen in a learning environment where you're trying to figure out how to work with a certain technology and you can't connect to a system or something's not working, and the reason is because the Windows firewall is in the way. Now, I kind of go back and forth with this one. There is a side of me that says, well, you're going to have to learn how to work with it with the firewall on in the production world, but I would rather you learn the first time with the firewall not getting in the way, and then you can always go back and see, once you've learned how to do something, go ahead and try it again with the firewall on and see what the differences are. See how you may have to set up certain exceptions to make things work. Okay, so we're going to turn it off. And by the way, you're welcome to go ahead and leave it on if you want. In other words, if you're of the philosophy that says, okay, you know what, I'll work through the learning headaches, go ahead. I'm just letting you know that if you, run into a problem that maybe I don't have here, it could be your firewall that's causing the problem. So let's go ahead and close out of here. And notice that it still says that it's on. And the reason why is because when you make changes here in the Server Manager, it does not always change the screen instantaneously. If you give it a few moments, this will eventually change. Or if you want to see that, you want to confirm that things have indeed changed, just go ahead and click to refresh the server. And it takes just a moment here, and you'll see the bar scrolling across, and boom, Windows Firewall is now off. Okay, so we've made that change. The next thing is remote management. It is enabled by default. Again, can't emphasize that enough. The intent is for you to not be at a physical computer. You're supposed to be managing it remotely, so they enable it by default. The next item we have here is remote desktop, which is disabled by default. The theory is, with Windows Server 2012, when you are managing it remotely, it is supposed to be really, really, really close to managing it locally. And so the old days of having to remote desktop in to do everything are kind of a thing of the past. Now that said, I am going to click on the link and I'm going to enable the remote desktop capabilities. And you'll see here that it's going to create a firewall exception. Okay, so that's how we would have got past the firewall for remote desktop. But I'll click OK to that message. And again, we've turned off the firewall, so it really doesn't matter. This checkbox right here, allow connections only from computers running remote desktop with NLA, network level authentication. That's an added layer of security. You have to be running Vista or newer as far as the operating system goes in order to support that. We could select specific users that can remote desktop in, but I'm going to go ahead and leave it with the default, which is that the administrator can get in. I don't need any other users to be able to get in. So I'll click OK. And the reason I did this, by the way, the reason I enabled a remote desktop is because, again, in the environment that I'm working in here, I'm going to be remote desktoping into the machine so that we are truly working local on the computer. Okay, so that's why I'm turning it on. What I'm also going to do is I'm not going to click refresh. I'll go ahead and let this continue to say disabled. I know I've enabled it. And we'll see if before we're done, if this updates on its own. Now the next item is something called NIC teaming, and this has to do with bringing multiple NICs together, functioning as one network connection. Nothing we need to worry about right now. I just wanted to give you a quick explanation about what it is. Here we have our Ethernet connection, and you'll see here that we have IPv4 and IPv6. They're both on, and IPv4 is getting its IP address from a DHCP server. Well, we don't want that. Right? This is going to be a domain controller. So we want to set up our IP configuration. So I'm going to click on the link. And if you're not already liking this, you should be, because this is very cool. You click on these links, it takes you right where you need to be. Here's my Ethernet connection. So I'm going to go ahead and right-click and go to Properties. Highlight Internet Protocol version 4. Careful not to click on the checkbox or it'll clear it. You want to click on the words to highlight. Go to Properties. and I want to assign an IP address. Now the IP address I'm going to assign is 192.168.10.201. There's a couple things I will tell you. First of all, the 192.168.10 network is the network here in my office. Okay, the specific network that I'm on is the 192.168.10 network. So that's where that came from. And then I have decided that the 200 to 220 range, and really I shouldn't even say 200, it's the 201 to 220 range, is what I've kind of set aside to use for servers. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and use 201 for this particular server. And if I hit tab, you'll see it auto-populates the appropriate subnet mask because I am using a Class C range and I am intentionally trying to go ahead and stay within this Class C address. The default gateway is going to be 192.168.10.1. Okay, that is the IP address of the router that I have here in my office that gets me out to the internet. For DNS, I'll go ahead and also point to 192.168.10.1. Now that's going to change once I become a domain controller, okay, because I'll also become a DNS server and I'll point to myself for DNS. But for name resolution right now, if I want to get out to the internet, I also need to point to that router because that router is also a DNS server. Now click OK and close. Close out of this window. And I want to show you something. First of all, you'll notice remote desktop is enabled. That refresh has come through. But the IP address hasn't. Oh, and as I'm saying to you, it refreshed that as well. Okay, so the timing on the refresh sometimes is a little bit faster than others. If I scroll this bar over to the right, what else do we have? We last installed updates never. Windows Update is not configured. I'm going to go ahead and configure it. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and click on the link. And what's it going to do? Well, it's going to take me into Windows Update. So I'm going to tell it to turn on automatic updates. And the first thing it does when you turn on automatic updates is it checks for any updates that are out there. I figure that I will have very little or none in the way when it comes to updates because, well, Windows Server 2012 was just released not that long before doing this particular course. Anyway, we'll give this a minute to go ahead and check for the updates. And while it's checking, I'm going to go ahead and click this window behind it. I'm going to go ahead and click back into the Server Manager. And I won't worry about that. Okay, eventually what's going to happen here is, again, it's going to say that this is configured, and it'll say the time and date that we checked for updates. And actually, it's kind of bugging me. It's flashing back and forth because it's getting mad. It wants to continue that process. But in the meantime, let's jump down here to Windows Error Reporting. It's off, and I'm going to leave it off. Okay, both the error reporting and then also the next one, the Customer Experience Improvement Program, not participating. The reason I'm leaving them off is because I'm working in a test environment. If this was a production environment, might not be a bad idea to turn those on. These are both programs to where things are reported to Microsoft so that they can learn about the problems that are out there and they can make the system better. Okay, so again, I'm going to leave them off because this is a non-production environment. You don't want to send fake information over. It's not the end of the world if you did turn them on, even in this test environment. And the reason why is because, well, things are still really happening. It's just a matter of, are they happening because you're doing something that you just kind of out there crazy trying to learn, or are they happening because, there's a problem with the system? So it's not that bad either way. All right, so let's go ahead and jump back over and, yeah, here we can see Windows Update. And by the way, I just hit Alt-Tab to switch back over to that other window. It says you're set to automatically install. It says there is one important update available. Not going to worry about installing it right now. Let me go ahead and close that window. And then we're just going to go ahead and move on. I will point out that you'll see here that we now have Windows Update, install updates automatically. Okay, so that's happening. All right, so let's move along here and let's go on to IE Enhanced Security Configuration. And you'll see that it's on by default. And I will tell you that since this is a server, I would recommend leaving it on. But again, because this is a learning environment, and I know that I may jump out to the internet and want to show you stuff and not have all this extra security in place, I'm going to go ahead and click on the link and turn off the enhanced security. But again, I really need to emphasize, I'm only doing this because this is a learning computer. You don't want to do this on a production server, ever. Okay, you want to have that extra security. You don't want to have problems because of people out goofing around the internet on a server, which is just crazy. All right, the next thing we have here is the time zone, and it's defaulted to the Pacific time zone, which I'm going to say that that's probably because Microsoft's headquarters are actually in the Pacific time zone. I'm going to go ahead and change this time zone to the Eastern time zone. The reason is because this server is representing a New York server for the Global Mantics network. Okay, Global Mantics, company that we're using here. This is set up in New York, so we'll go to the Eastern time zone. We have that set up. Click OK. And that pretty much brings us to the end of configuring the server. Okay, that's kind of the end of the initial configuration task, if you want to call it that. Okay, the old initial configuration tool. So now that we've done that, just real quick here, like I said, I don't want to go through all the different aspects of Server Manager because we're going to learn it as we go along with the various things that we're going to do in this course. But let me go ahead and jump back over to the dashboard. And just a couple of quick things that I'd like to go over with you is I just want to show you, we did number 1, right? Configure this local server. But we also have this 2, 3, and 4 in this little welcome section. Number 2, add roles and features. That is something that we will do as we go through various lessons. Okay, so this is where we can add the different roles and features to the server. Number 3 is where we can add other servers to manage. Okay, so whereas right now we're only managing this server, if I were in Server Manager on any machine, whether it be another server or even a Windows 8 computer with the RSAT tools installed, we can add what servers I want to be able to manage from this Server Manager right here. And then the last thing, number 4, is where we can create a server group. Now, certain server groups are created by default. If I scroll down here, okay, you'll see here that I have 3 server groups. Okay, I have the file and storage services, and it's just showing you that there's just one server in there. We have the local server, just the one, and then all servers, just the one. Hey, go figure, it's just one. We've only installed one server. If we were to install additional servers and or roles onto those servers, we would see those server groups change. Beyond that, if we want to create our own server group, maybe we know there's a certain block of computers that we want to have managed together, we could go ahead and create them into a server group. And when we do, a box will show up for that server group. And when certain errors occur, right, we saw that red that appeared before, you'll notice it's gone now. Okay, the services have all started. We will see those errors based upon the servers in that group. Now, another thing I want to show you real quick here is the Manage menu. Okay, and if I click on the Manage menu, you'll see here that I can do some things that are similar in the sense that you can add roles and features, you can add servers, create a server group, go into the properties of the Server Manager, but there's one particular setting right here, or one command, which is removing roles and features. You can add roles and features down here. You can also add a role to a server by right-clicking on it, but you cannot remove a role or a feature by really any other way other than coming up here to the Manage menu and removing roles and features. Okay, so I wanted to point that out to you. And then we have the Tools menu. If I click on that, you will see what looks like, and it basically is, what was formerly the Administrative Tools menu that we used to find in the Start menu. Okay, so this is a menu that will change based upon the roles and features and the various tools that have been installed on the particular computer that you're working with. Okay, but this is why we want to pretty much work from the Server Manager. Okay, and the reason is because unlike before, where maybe we would click on Start and then dig our way through into an Administrative Tools menu to go ahead and get into some specific tool, well, now we have the Tools menu straight here from the Server Manager. So that's pretty much it. We've done it. we have installed and at least done the initial setup of a Windows Server 2012 computer. So that brings us to the end of this lesson, and well, now you should know how to install Windows Server 2012, which is kind of awesome because, well, now we can go learn how everything works within that operating system.